and welcome to ET Now Startup Central, India's first and only daily show dedicated to startups, technology and entrepreneurship. I'm Chandra Shrikant, coming to you live from India's startup capital, Bengaluru. And we kick off the show with some good news this Monday evening because India's got yet another unicorn. We're talking about Udaan, which has raised over $220 million in its Series C round of funding, valuing it at $1 billion. Now, what's really remarkable about this, Udaan was founded less than 2 years back. In fact, it was registered sometime in November 2016 by 3 former senior executives of Flipkart. In less than 2 years, it's attained unicorn status, which is a feat of sorts. It's not something that we've seen with other startups so far. If you look at the space that Udaan operates in, it's a B2B e-commerce player. It brings buyers and sellers together on its platform. So it's not a B2C player in that sense. And if you look at the kind of investors that it's managed to attract in its latest round, it includes the likes of Russia's DST Global as well as Lightspeed Growth Fund. Now, Udaan was founded by Sujit Kumar, Amod Malviya and Vaibhav Gupta, all three who were with Flipkart at some point. So I guess this is yet another success story coming out of Flipkart. But for more perspective on what this means for the startup ecosystem in India and what Udaan's rise means, we have a very special guest joining us live from London, Bejul Somaia, the Managing Director of Lightspeed India, one of Udaan's earliest investors as early as 2016 when they invested in Series A, joins us right here on Startup Central. Bejul, thank you so much for joining us all the way from London. A unicorn in less than 2 years. You know, your first reaction to this massive Series C round of funding, what it means for Udaan and Indian startups in particular.
Sure. Look, I think financing events are really milestones on the way to building companies, and I think this is an exciting milestone. But it is just a milestone. There's a lot more to do. But it is recognition, I think, of the opportunities in the B2B space, of the scale that can arise from leveraging internet technology in some of these white spaces, and of course, the quality of the team here and what they've accomplished so far.
Right. And, you know, what would you say to critics or skeptics who think that this is perhaps too much growth in, or too much funds in, too less period of time, less than 2 years? Will it sort of increase the weight of expectations on a startup that's just 2 years old? What would you say to them?
Well, look, I think when you have digital companies that are going after large white spaces, there is a real prize to being a company that wins the space, especially in business models that are marketplace-oriented and have network effects. There is significant benefit to not only being the first mover, but being the company that achieves scale, liquidity on a platform like this. The more buyers you have, the more sellers will be there. The more sellers that are there, the more selection and the better the pricing, and therefore the more buyers that you attract. And so I think, whether it's in Udaan's case or in the case of other companies going after large market opportunities, you'll find that they do capitalize themselves well, and that is part of the strategy ultimately to win a space.
Right, right. If I look at the B2B space today, Bejul, some of the older players include the likes of a Power to SME and an India Mart. Some of the startups that perhaps Udaan competes with would include a ShopX and Off Business. What really sets Udaan apart? Is it, the fact that they've managed to perhaps scale up faster than any of their competitors in this category? Lakhs of sellers on their platform in a month, in just about 2 years. Would that be the differentiator compared to competition, the way they've managed to scale up their business in a space that has a lot of potential? Yeah,
look, I think all the companies you've mentioned are fantastic companies. And I think at a high level, it looks like all B2B is the same and one clubs it into the same bucket. But in reality, the strategies and the approaches targeted by each of these companies are different, and they're attacking different parts of the market. So I don't think this is about Udaan necessarily, being a better company than any of the others. I think just the strategy that they have employed, which is a true marketplace approach, the work they've done on the credit and logistics side, and obviously the scale that they've achieved, I think is the reason for the success that they're having. But again, I would say that it's targeted at a different opportunity set than some of the other companies that you mentioned.
Right. And Bejul, do you see focus increasing in this segment? Because we're not just talking about startups anymore, but B2B is a space where you will have an Amazon business, a Metro Cash and Carry, larger rivals such as Walmart, Alibaba. People are talking about a Reliance that is looking to enter this space. So how is this going to pan out? We've seen this happening in the e-commerce, B2C e-commerce space, where it started out with startups, then you have international giants, and then you have a homegrown Reliance, all of them really facing off right now. Is a similar scenario going to play out in B2B as well? And, how do you see this playing out eventually?
I think it's a great question. And I think the reality is that all large markets worth winning will see high competitive intensity. I don't expect this will be any different. Some of the companies that you've named. The only point I would make is that B2B commerce in India it's extremely nuanced. This is not a simple problem to solve. Understanding traders at the ground level is very different than applying a B2C strategy that has been played out in other markets. And so I think that this competition or this market will be won by the companies that understand their constituents best, that build solutions that are really tailored to and unique to India. And I think in that respect, Udaan is writing the playbook for the first time for a market like India. This is not a replica of a business that has been built elsewhere. It's being built first principles from the ground up, and I think that will give the company some real defensibility as others enter the space.
Right. Before we let you go, Bejul, this is the fourth unicorn to come out of India in 2 months. I mean, you might call it a financing event, but if I look at it, it's a huge shot in the arm. You've had Swiggy, Policy Bazaar, Freshworks, and now Udaan. It's an interesting mix of two B2C players, two B2B players, and this comes months after the Flipkart Walmart deal, which is probably the biggest exit for any VC in India. How do you view all these events together? Is 2018 perhaps a very good year as far as the Indian startup ecosystem is concerned, minus some of the irrational exuberance that we saw in the 14-15 time period?
Yeah, see, Chandra, we've been investing in India for a decade. And so I think a decade when we started investing was perhaps too early with hindsight, but the promise was always there. When you have internet technology hitting a market as large as India, significant value will be created. I mean, the digital economy in this country is being built. It is being built now, and it will continue to be built over the next decade. So just as we saw with the physical economy or the infrastructure economy getting built in the first part of sort of 2010, we're now seeing the digital economy get built. And when that happens in a country as large as India, I don't think we should be surprised by the value creation opportunity that exists. And I think what you've just referred to is really the proof of that. Policy Bazaar has been around a long time, but they've navigated themselves to a leadership position. And so I think we will see more of this. There has been an acceleration over the last 18 months. I would say two catalysts for that. One is obviously Geo, and the second is reforms like GST, which have led to an accelerated pace of digitization, especially on the small business side. So I would say those two events have provided more acceleration. But this trend line, in our view, was inevitable once the country started adopting digital technology.
Right. On that note, Bejul, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us all the way from London on ED Now Startup Central, and congratulations to the Lightspeed India team for spotting Udaan early and seeing it through this unicorn status today. But on that note, time to move on to our next story. Interestingly, this is also a Lightspeed India portfolio company, OYO, and the Times of India reported earlier today that Didi Chuxing from China is all set to invest in OYO in a move that will mark its second investment in India after Ola. Now, if you look at the amount that's being quoted, now this could happen somewhere in the range of 800 million to 1 billion financing round. But remember, that is the new financing round that OYO is in talks for, and something that will value it at $4.5 billion. So that's going to be a massive valuation bump up for OYO. And it actually makes sense, because if you look at the biggest event from OYO in the last year, it's been its big bet on China. It's one of the few Indian startups that's managed to expand overseas and in China at that, and they're already at a big scale in China. And Ritesh has spoken about how China has been a very promising market for them so far. So I guess that's one funding round that we'll have to look forward to in the coming weeks. But it's certainly going to be a big one if Didi Chuxing backs OYO in its current round of funding. Moving away from that to another top voice we have on the show this evening, and that's Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant. He spoke to my colleague in Delhi about the Mobility Summit in the capital this week. Everyone's, of course, looking forward to that. It's going to have the who's who from the world of auto, from the world of startups. There's going to be a lot of discussion around smart mobility and electric mobility. Listen into what Amitabh Kant has to say.
No, we've come out with a number of discussion papers which we'll unveil during the Mobility Summit, and let people give their inputs on that. Let the whole world debate that, discuss that, and let the government absorb those inputs. We would like a very predictable, very consistent, very long-term approach to mobility in India. It's not just we are pushing for a sharing, connected and a zero emission world, and our objective should be to get inputs from the entire world on technology aspects. And because there's a huge amount of disruption taking place in different parts, there's a huge amount of R&D, research and development which is taking place. So we should, a vast number of global leaders who are coming here, there were many Indian leaders who are coming here, let them all give their inputs. The government would consider that, and based on their inputs, the final vision will be spelt out by the Honorable Prime Minister.
But sir, having said that, infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges. You said that acquiring lithium batteries wouldn't be a problem, but stakeholders also say that there will be more costly. So will something be done on that front?
So 80% of the economic opportunities lies between battery pack and battery fuel cells, and so there's 80% of the economic one. On raw materials, only 20%. Even if we have to import the 20%, we should try and capture the 80% economic opportunity, which is huge. So our objective should be to manufacture fuel cells in India.
So it was also said that there should be some incentive, some push from the government side, that there should be some GST relaxation on two-wheelers when it comes to EVs and all. Will you also from your end push for that?
No, 76% of the automobiles in India are two-wheelers. They consume 64% of the petrol. They pollute about 30%. So our focus has to be two-wheelers. Our focus has to be three-wheelers. And that's the uniqueness of the Indian situation. And we will push for electrification and zero emission world on two-wheelers, three-wheelers, public transportation, and a sharing and connected world, and then the lastly the personalized cars.
Startup in this space, Drona Aviation's founder and CEO Apurva Anil Godbole joins us right here on Startup Central. Apurva, what does the recent regulation mean for a startup that's largely operated in an unregulated space where, there's often been lack of clarity? What do the recently unveiled regulations mean for you as a startup operating in this space?
I think it's a very good first step. We understand the government had their own set of concerns. There are some positives, there are some concerns. Positives because we were a little scared looking at the draft regulations that had come up earlier, but it seems like the government has been listening to the companies and the startups in the drone space. So the good part is they've tried to keep it paperless, and at least it's a good first attempt to keep it seamless. The hope is that they keep monitoring the whole thing closely and try to streamline a good SOP for the drone companies in the coming time.
Apurva, you mentioned it's a good first step, but there are concerns. Can you elaborate on what those concerns are? Anything in particular that you want to red flag?
Some of the concerns are around the drones having their own ID plates. I don't know, there's a lack of clarity on what does the government look at when they're looking at these ID plates. One concern from a technical point of view is, if these plates are made of metal or something else, they could cost the drone their flight time, their endurance time, and essentially cost the economic output that a drone gives out in its every flight. So there needs to be a little more clarity on that front. What sort of unique IDs are the government looking at? There also needs to be a little more clarity on what happens post sunset, because there will be times when you will want to look at use the drones post sunset. There needs to be a little more on, I believe they said they will bring it out in the coming few months, but that's another thing that we'll be looking at on the drone front, on the regulations front.
Finally, Apurva, we are a long way off before delivery by drones happens by e-com players and food delivery companies. But how does this compare when you look at, how countries have dealt with drones globally? Where does India stand?
I believe our regulations are, okay, let me put it this way. I believe as a first draft, these regulations are okay. But these will need to be continuously revisited as they go along. These are definitely a little more restrictive than the regulations that are put out by, let's say, FAA or the European countries. But it's a good start. It's a start that we have been waiting for a while. I really hope that we follow up on and get the best out of it. Coming to the second part, as to us being a little behind on this one, I believe these regulations open up for the service sector to start operating in India, and I think that's where most of the jobs will start, will be created. And once the government gets to see the number of jobs that the drone companies are bringing onto the table, I believe they will go ahead and relax the rules going down the line.
Thanks so much for joining us, Apurva, and we will keep coming back to you to find out what the incremental developments on this are, what other changes the government needs to make. Udaan, thanks for joining us. And before we end the show, time to bring you up to speed with some numbers which will give you a sense of where digital transactions are today. UPI transactions crossed a fresh milestone with NPCI releasing the latest data for August. According to that, UPI transactions have crossed the 300 million mark. That is a significant number, and it's clearly gone up compared to the previous month, because in July the number reported was 235.65 million, and if you look at the year ago and if you look at the month before July, the previous month, it was 246 million. So it's been steadily going up, but we have to wait and see if this was a one-off, because a lot of flood relief contributions happened via UPI. A lot of people were using Bhim UPI. We have to see if this trend sustains in the coming months, but at least UPI is seeing a huge surge, if not in value, at least in volume terms. This is clearly overtaken, credit card by many millions. But remember, debit card usage is still above 400 million. On that note, time to bring this episode of Startup Central to an end. Hope you like the show and stay tuned to ET Now for more news and updates.